This podcast may contain explicit language. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
And you're back in the studio again.
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
It was a short vacation.
We also welcome back our returning celebrity guest, co-host of the War Starts at Midnight podcast, and the newest member of the Five Timers Club. That's right, it's Peterson W. Hill.
Back in the saddle for a little bit of Italian cinema, or Italian.
You're going to have to move to Wisconsin so you get in-state residency here pretty soon.
I don't know if that's on the docket, one would say.
Probably not. And this is not the time to move here.
I like my my 1 month of winter, and then the rest is somewhat spring to summer. I'll
be honest, we've had less snow here, I think, right now than either certain places in Florida or Louisiana for the entire winter so far.
Really?
Yes. We have currently no snow on the ground, and it was 41 outside today.
It's supposed to be 51 tomorrow.
It was 65 as I was walking to my car after work today, and that felt really nice. I was like, this sounds like a margarita on a patio with some chips and salsa.
Now that we're renaming it the Gulf of America, somebody else had suggested it on Twitter that it just be renamed Gulf of Margaritaville. That sounds so much better to me. Anyway, I digress. Tonight for our 247th episode, we discuss La Dolce Vita, celebrating its 65th anniversary on the day that this releases. Written and directed by Federico Fellini, with Ennio Flaiano, Tullio Pinelli, Brunello Rondi, and Pier Paolo Pasolini. Music by Nino Rota, and cinematography by Otello Martelli. Starring, and here we go, Marcello Mastroianni as Marcello Rubini, Anita Ekberg as Sylvia Rank, Anouk Amy, let's just go with Amy, as Madalena, Yvonne Furneaux as Emma, Lex Barker as Robert, Magali Noel as Fanny, Elaine Cuny as Steiner, Nadia Gray as Nadia, Jacques Cernat as Devo, Laura Betti as Laura, Walter Santesso as Paparazzo, Valerie, oh good God, Ciangotini as Paula, Ricardo Garone as Ricardo. I mean, a really creative naming here. Annibale Nici as Marcello's father, Ida Gali as Debutante of the Year, and Audrey McDonald as Jane. Thank you for the Anglo-Saxon one, just thrown in right on the end. All right, recognition for this movie. La Dolce Vita, or The Sweet Life, was released on February 5th, 1960. Despite its censorship by the Catholic Church, the film was a smash hit across Europe, becoming the second biggest film in Italy that year, the highest grossing foreign language film in North America, and one of the most viewed foreign language films of the 1960s. La Dolce Vita was critically praised by American and European critics alike. It also earned the Palme d'Or, or Golden Palm, at the 1960 Cannes Film Festival. The film would be nominated for 4 Academy Awards: for Best Director for Fellini, Original Screenplay for Fellini, Pinelli, Flaiano, and Rondi, Art Direction for Black and White, and Costume Design for Black and White, for which it won. Entertainment Weekly voted it as the 6th greatest film of all time in 1999. The Village Voice ranked the film at number 112 in its top 250 best films of the century list in 1999, based on a poll of critics. The film was included in the New York Times' guide to the best 1,000 movies ever made in 2002. In 2010, the film was ranked number 11 in Empire Magazine's The 100 Best Films of the World Cinema. In the British Film Institute's 2002 Sight and Sound polls of the greatest films ever made, La Dolce Vita ranked 24th in the critics' poll and 14th in the directors' poll. In the 2012 version of the list, La Dolce Vita ranked 39th in the critics poll and 37th in the directors poll. In January 2002, the film was voted at number 28 on the list of the top 100 essential films of all time by the National Society of Film Critics. The film was voted at number 59 on the list of 100 greatest films by the prominent French magazine Cahiers du Cinéma in 2008. In 2007, the film was ranked number 19 by The Guardian's Readers' Poll on a list of 40 greatest foreign films of all time. In 2010, The Guardian ranked the film 23rd in its list of 25 great art house films. In 2016, The Hollywood Reporter ranked the film second among 69 counted winners of the Palme d'Or to date, behind only The Leopard from 1963. Taxi Driver and Blow Up were third and fourth. The film ranked 10th in BBC's 2018 list of the 100 greatest foreign language films voted by 209 film critics from 43 countries around the world. In 2021, the film was ranked at number 6 on Time Out magazine's list of the 100 best movies of all time. La Dolce Vita currently holds a 95% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 95 score on Metacritic, and a 4.3 out of 5 on Letterboxd. But as we do each week, Dad, what is your relationship to this film?
Before I answer that, as you were struggling with the names or list of the actors, you could have just substituted, and most Americans wouldn't have any idea, just using last names as being various forms of pasta. Enrico fettuccine, Enrico ravioli, they would have never known.
For the people that bothered to check the website, or the people that are probably artsy, that probably know better, probably not. Because after the first, if you said the first two pastas, you might get away with it. But by about the fourth or fifth one, you're going to be like, oh,
Marcello
Rosini.
Rubini.
Yeah, there's some obscure ones like a Cine de Pipi.
If there's an actor in a Cine de Pipi in a Fellini film, I will let you read that one.
There is one magazine, Tom, I'll correct you on. It's Cahiers du Cinéma. Because I'm sure Cahiers du Cinéma is going to come up numerous times in this list.
Well, I mean, it has before, and I've always heard it Cahiers. But okay. I don't pronounce French, just like I don't really pronounce Italian.
Okay.
You speak third best?
I know English incredibly well, and I stick to that.
That's why I said third best for Italian.
Buongiorno.
And as far as my relationship to this movie, I didn't have one. The best I can say is I read Roger Ebert's book on the greatest movies, and it was in there. So I read that piece that he had written about it later on, and that was my knowledge of the movie. So this is the first time I've seen it, and the first time I've really even understood where it was coming from. I mean, I read various places where it's referenced in various cultural situations, other movies, etc. Had no idea where that stuff came from.
I'm obviously, being a cinephile, aware of Federico Fellini, but I have never once until this week seen any of his films. And moreover, unless it's 8.5, I don't know if I could have just named any one of them outside of that. This is, for me, a bit of a cine milestone, passing the barrier of what a lot of people consider to be a top 5 director and exploring one of his works for the first time.
So I got that Great Movies book that Roger Ebert wrote. My siblings gave it to me. I was either 14 or 15 that I just turned for my birthday, and kind of read it front to back, kind of quickly went through it, and picked like 5 movies that I was like, these are the 5 I got to see soon. Taxi Driver's on there, Ron, Keir Kurosawa's Ron, and then La Dolce Vita was one of them. So immediately go get Taxi Driver, fell in love with it, saw Ron, also fell in love with that, and then watched La Dolce Vita, and I, at least for the 14 or 15-year-old that I was, thought that I loved it, right? Don't know if I really understood it. A lot of this would go right over the head of a 14, 15-year-old kid, right? And until I was like 20, I'd seen it 3 or 4 times in that time span. I was kind of fascinated by it as an object, but I haven't seen it probably in close to 20 years. in that time frame where I was like, 20 to 15, it probably would have been my top 5 movies if I was going to rattle them off really quick. And I hadn't touched it for like 20 years. So it's interesting coming back to this movie with age and perspective, and not seeing it for the first time when I was, in my 30s or even 20s. It's an interesting object to come back to later in life.
Well, and I think one of the passages, if I remember right, reading from Ebert's review in the 90s, I think it was, had to do with movies don't change, but your perspective as you age does.
I believe that's where he ends it. Yep.
And so his insinuation there obviously being that he had, and I think it centers around how his review is done, that he watched it as like a 20-year-old, and then he watched it in his 30s, then he watched it in his 40s, and it changed for him each time. So I do think that certain films can only be appreciated truly at a certain age. I'd like to create a list of like films at some point where you shouldn't see them before a certain age. For me, like It's a Wonderful Life, you shouldn't watch before you've turned 30. As much as that's a Christmas staple, I don't think you can truly grasp what that movie is and the impact of it until you've turned 30 and you've had some life experience where not everything has gone to plan for how you thought your life was going to be in your early 20s.
For me, I have 2 films that I think that applies to. One is Lost in Translation. I think you need to be a middle-aged man to appreciate it because there's a loneliness that develops in being a middle-aged man, that you're looking for connection at some point in time because you've put so much of yourself into your career that you've let things slide. And most of those are relationships. The other one is No Country for Old Men. Tom hated it when he saw it.
Old Men.
Huh?
No Country for Old Men.
No Country for Old Men. If I said something else, I apologize. Anyway, you didn't understand it, and I said the ending, the Tommy Lee Jones monologue at the very end, is the purpose of the film, which is men go through their whole lives trying to, he was a law enforcement agent. He spent his whole life trying to stop and to protect and do all this. And ultimately, he realizes he couldn't do it, that he failed. And so his whole life kind of had no purpose. And I said, again, that's something that you have to be on the tail end of your life, your career, to grasp what the impact of that ultimately was.
Yeah, I mean, I can go down that No Country for Old Men rabbit hole for days. I'm not going to do that because Tom's trying to keep this to a modest recording time.
Wait for the 2 years when it comes up in 2027, because it will almost certainly be on our
it would list, have to be. Yeah,
our schedule for 2027, along with that Australian movie that Eliza wants us to do.
Okay.
Which I forget the name of.
2007 Australian movie?
1997 Australian
movie.
movie.
97, okay.
But we're doing them based on anniversaries, so.
Shine?
No, I'd have to remember what it is.
It's a comedy, if I remember right.
Yeah, it was an Australian comedy, but I could find it. It's in my email. Anyway. But since we're kind of generally on the subject, let's turn it over to what is the film actually about. And good luck.
From the one that has the longest lifespan with this movie, looking at it now, I think it's very much about emptiness and loneliness and searching for any meaning in your life in external things and not seeing kind of what's in front of you. I think that's a lot of it. I mean, Marcello is certainly an empty, vacuous person who's smart and can be charming, but he's this empty shell of a man. And we see him go through this week where it starts with his fiance presumably trying to kill herself or maybe accidentally overdosing, but either way, not a good situation to be in at the beginning of the movie. And the next night, like 12 hours later, he is out with a Swedish actress trying to bed her. And it's all about the enticement and excitement of a night, and then you get to the next morning and have all the regrets build up, and all these regrets just weighing upon you. So that to me is the largest thrust of what this movie is about.
To me, it's a lot of this, which is there are certain pizza places that can't create a pizza that tastes good. So what they do is they load it with salt, because salt ultimately can
You got to
hide.
provide an example here now.
Well,
Godfather's Pizza, I've heard you complain about in the past.
It sounds like Pizza Hut to me. I hate pizza. I think it's like
I don't know. Pizza Hut is very salty that way. They compensate for it. That's what we're talking about here, which is people who regret and have this idea that their lives have no meaning, that they have no true relationships. And so they hide it or mask it by just looking for the ultimate thrill, to live a life of decadence, and to do it in a way that makes other people, despite the fact that they clearly show that this is superficial, people still want to do it.
I guess if I were to rephrase this, is the sweet life supposed to be truthful or facetious? Because the way I look at the film, in many ways, this is the projection of what people would love. He gets to hang around with beautiful women all the time who fawn over him, that he gets to bed at left, right, and center. He gets to hang
Does
out
he?
with aristocracy. He
we
gets
never
to
see in bed. Yeah.
well, he beds the Madalena.
Do we see it happen?
Do we see him in bed?
Yes. It's in the
we see
opening
him in
scene.
bed kissing, but
see
we
him
don't
kissing,
see him
yeah.
in making love.
We never see him consummate a relationship.
No.
So it's all about this buildup, and then we don't even know if his kind of debauchery and sin leads to any kind of carnal excitement.
Yeah, it could end up that he's just not performing.
But he's got a rather good-looking Italian sports car, and he gets to follow around celebrities and kind of be important, so to say. But it all seems rather hollow or false, which I know you're both insinuating already. But so is this a truthful title, or is it a facetious title, or is it both?
I think it's supposed to be a little bit of both, because I think you're supposed to be enticed and drawn in by some of the lifestyle and be like, man, that looks fun. And then you see him in the morning and it's that blinding light that you wake up to if you've ever spent all night doing anything, and then you walk outside and it's just this blinding light glaring at you, almost like gazing at you with regret, and immediately tells you you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have lived that night.
And ultimately, who in this film is happy?
I was going to get to that. My phrase for the film is the three words I find to be some of the most detrimental in American history: pursuit of happiness. Because as long as you're trying to pursue happiness, you will never actually be happy.
And that's what I think is so important. The Steiner character is that I think we, the audience, sees in that the second scene when he's with his kids and interacting and trying to tell Marcello, I can get you a job somewhere else. I think that scene with Steiner, we see the cracks in the facade that he's built, and we see kind of what he's missing or lacking. We don't think it's going to be as tragic as it actually does turn out to be, but I think there's certainly the cracks in the foundation that Federico Fellini lays in that scene, which I think is one of the pivotal scenes to understanding the movie.
So, Dad, this is our first Fellini movie, as we've mentioned. What stands out for you about his work in this?
This does not have a narrative. It is actually multiple vignettes.
Vignettes. Vignettes.
Excuse me. Vignettes. Vignettes.
Vignettes, yeah.
Vignettes. And he does not spoon feed you what the purpose or meaning is of each portion of the film.
I would say it's challenging. The other thing that I notice about this is it's very Italian. I had a very difficult time trying to catch all of the subtitles because they talk so fucking fast.
They do talk fast in this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, Anyway, beside
Yeah.
the point. But the movie looks, on a technical standpoint, gorgeous. For a black and white film, I mean, the cinematography in this is excellent. The costume designing, the set production, filming on location. I mean, these are some of the most beautiful places on earth. And I was struck by kind of taking in all the visual eye candy, essentially, from the film, a little bit to kind of offset the lack of a narrative.
Tom, can I ask you a question just about the visuals? Because I think key to the visuals is that we see something like the Trevi Fountain and the Via Veneto, which are these beautiful streets, and then juxtaposed with those is what I guess are the outskirts of Rome.
Mhm.
And I feel like they're always going down these dirt roads, and it feels like a war-torn Rome that hasn't been rebuilt yet. I think that's very crucial to what Fellini is getting at here, is that this is a decimated country from war, and they haven't even begun to rebuild in certain places, and that's where all these people live.
I guess I hadn't thought of that.
Because I mean, there are beautiful locations here, but then like the scene where Emma and Marcello are basically having their huge fight.
Yeah.
It's like the middle of the night, and it's this like dirt road in the middle of nowhere, and it could be Brazil, America, anywhere in the 1900s. It doesn't have to necessarily be Italy at that point.
I think dirt roads in this time and place, especially like in America as well, the country roads were a lot less developed than they are now. So I think that was more common than maybe we're giving it a little bit of credit for. But the other thing, I guess, part of the reason it didn't strike me is that a lot of the movie does take place in kind of these open spaces.
And I'm thinking another example would be when we're exiting Steiner's house
Mhm.
after the tragedy, and it's specifically framed so that you see the building, and then you see this huge portion on the right that's just like a little plaza. There's just this vast emptiness, and then the left, there is nothing for miles behind it. And this is a guy who presumably has plenty of money, a nice apartment, and it feels in some ways like it's just this city that has not been rebuilt, almost like Marcello has not been fully formed either.
I suppose I could find that. I mean, it would be hard for all of Italy to have been rebuilt in 15 years based on the destruction of the
Oh
war.
yeah, of course, yeah, of course.
So, Dad, do you want to dig a little further into the movie? Do you have our plot summary ready for us?
Set against the glamorous backdrop of Rome in the 1950s, La Dolce Vita follows Marcello Rubini, a jaded journalist, as he drifts through a series of decadent encounters over 7 days and nights. Torn between the shallow allure of celebrity culture and his yearning for deeper meaning, Marcello is drawn into the chaotic lives of socialites, artists, and film stars. As he navigates lavish parties, fleeting romances, and existential crises, the film explores themes of decadence, disillusionment, and the search for purpose in a world consumed by hedonism. The film's iconic imagery, including Anita Ekberg's Midnight Wade in the Trevi Fountain, cements its status as a cinematic masterpiece and a poignant reflection on modern life.
Thank you. Did you know? The famous scene in the Trevi Fountain was shot over a week in March when nights were still cold. According to Federico Fellini, in an interview with Costanzo Costantini, Anita Ekberg stood in the cold water in her dress for hours with no trouble. However, Marcello Mastroianni, on the other hand, had to wear a wetsuit beneath his clothes, and even that wasn't enough. Still freezing, he downed an entire bottle of vodka, so he was completely drunk while shooting the scene. Did you know? The film contributed the term paparazzo to the language. The term derives from Marcello's photographer friend Paparazzo. It seems that the term paparazzo was coined by Fellini himself. Paparazzo means sparrow in one Italian dialect. In normal usage, the Italian for sparrow is passero. Fellini explained that the photographers hopping and scurrying around celebrities reminded him of sparrows, and he took the name paparazzo, as he explained in a later interview, from the name of someone he met in Calabria, southern Italy, where Greek names are still common. Paparazzi is the plural. Did you know? Credit for the creation of Steiner goes to co-screenwriter Tullio Pinelli. Having gone to school with Italian novelist Cesare Pavese, Pinelli had closely followed the writer's career and felt that his over-intellectualism had become emotionally sterile, leading to his suicide in a Turin hotel in 1950. This idea of a burnt-out existence is carried over to Steiner in the party episode where the sounds of nature are not to be experienced firsthand by himself and his guests, but in the virtual world of tape recordings. Did you know? Federico Fellini considered Burt Lancaster for the role of Marcello Rubini. He also considered Henry Fonda for the role of Steiner, who turned it down, as well as Walter Pidgeon and Peter Ustinov. And the original producer originally wanted Paul Newman for Marcello, Maurice Chevalier for Marcello's father, and Barbara Stanwyck for Nadia. Did you know? When shooting the famous Fontana di Trevi scene, director Federico Fellini complained that the water in the fountain looked dirty. A representative of Scandinavian Airlines System, SAS, present at the shooting, was able to supply the film team with some of the airline's green sea dye marker for use in case of an emergency landing at sea. This was used to color the water, and the director was satisfied. And with that, we will take our first break, and we will be right back.
Hey, movie lovers, this is Kyle, host and producer of the Movie Wars podcast. We're not just a movie review podcast. There's plenty of those. On Movie Wars, a panel of stand-up comedians blends humor with deep film analysis using their unique war card system to grade movies across key categories. Each episode delivers thoughtful insights and spirited debate, offering a fresh comedic take on film analysis. New episodes drop every Thursday on all podcasting platforms and YouTube. Deeply researched, gut-wrenchingly funny, you'll love Movie Wars.
Before we jump back into the episode, next week we welcome back returning guest Sarah Shea of the Shea Cinema Podcast to discuss Shampoo, or in other words, Warren Beatty Fucks. Warren
Beatty fucks everything and everyone.
Directed by Hal Ashby, written by Robert Towne and Warren Beatty. Music by Paul Simon, starring Warren Beatty, Julie Christie, Goldie Hawn, Lee Grant, and Jack Warden. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Another first watch for me.
There's a little bit of Richard Nixon in there, but it's mainly Warren fucking.
There's always a dick.
And it's both figuratively and literally, because he also fucks literally every woman, but he fucks figuratively Jack Warden and a bunch of guys in the film.
Yeah, and I mean, it's basically the story of John Peters, too. Which, John Peters?
Well, because we watched Licorice Pizza, but that's about it.
Yeah, so he's, basically, he owns the rights to Superman, too. So if there's ever a Superman movie, he's just living off those checks for the rest of his life. Can't make a Superman movie without paying John Peters.
Nice. Anyway, before we jump back into the regular episode, Peterson, what's going on with you? Where can people find you and your work?
Yeah, so check me out at War Starts at Midnight, where all podcasts be found. Twitter at Peterson W. Hill, as well as Instagram and Letterboxd, as well as Blue Sky for all handles. It's all Peterson W. Hill.
Perfect. Now, in someone listening to our episode from last week that also had you on it, and our newest segment, which is supposed to be monthly, but the GMOAT Hall of Fame, they wanted some clarification a little bit more on the rules. So I guess I will explain it this way. We have a couple of people here who I will give examples of who would not be eligible for the Hall of Fame yet. One is someone that Mr. Hill has discussed a few different times with us. That'd be David Fincher. Currently, David Fincher, he has 4 different credited films that we've discussed on the show. The Social Network, Fight Club, Gone Girl, and Zodiac. And until we do 7 later this year, he would not be eligible. So there will be new people as we continue to discuss more and more movies that will be eligible for the Hall of Fame.
Luckily, Kevin Spacey is eligible when 7 comes up, right? Immediate inductee?
I don't think we've had another Kevin Spacey movie yet.
No?
No, I don't think we've discussed him. Because this is all after Me Too anyway, so we've probably been avoiding it
He
to a little bit.
supersedes. After one movie, he's in.
But yeah, 7, and we have the Usual Suspects is going to be coming up also this year.
K-Pax too. Yeah.
Yeah, K-Pax. Okay, fine. Also, a personal favorite of my father's and my mother's, Cary Grant is only eligible after the next movie he does. He currently has North by Northwest, The Philadelphia Story, His Girl Friday, and Bringing Up Baby.
It's a good list.
And we don't, as far as I can tell, have any actresses we've discussed more than 3 times. Katharine Hepburn, I think, is the leading Clubhouse person, as well as Julia Roberts. Bringing Up Baby, The Philadelphia Story, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and Julia Roberts' Pretty Woman, and 2 different Oceans films. So I don't think either of them are eligible. But for consideration this week, so as long as we're going through this exercise, and you can write us at greatestalltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com, or you can find us on any of our socials at GMOAT Podcast to suggest people, because we will be taking people in the categories of producer, director, actor, actress, cinematographer. I tried to look up several different cinematographers to see if we'd had anybody 5 times. I couldn't find anybody, but if you want to take the challenge on, if you're a super fan of the show and can find people that I can't, all the power to you. Composer, we had John Williams as one of the first entrants last week. Art direction and costume design. So I have a few other people to suggest this week that we could add to our Hall of Fame. One came up in passing during the breaks last week by one Mr. Hill, and that would be Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford we have discussed for The Fugitive, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, Last Crusade, Apocalypse Now, and American Graffiti. So he is eligible. Morgan Freeman for Batman Begins, The Shawshank Redemption, The Dark Knight, Glory, and The Dark Knight Rises. Obviously, we also have a director here, and that would be Alfred Hitchcock for Psycho, The Birds, North by Northwest, Dial M for Murder, The Man Who Knew Too Much, The Lady Vanishes, Rope, Rear Window, and Shadow of a Doubt. Can you tell it's my dad's favorite director?
What about Nolan?
No. We've only discussed 4 Nolan films to this point.
Well, I want Hitchcock in.
And then Edith Head. We have discussed Sunset Boulevard, Roman Holiday, The Man Who Knew Too Much, Vertigo, Rear Window, The Birds, The Greatest Show on Earth, and The Sting. So, I also will nominate one composer that my father brought up last week that has also been discussed at least 5 times on the show, and that'd be Dmitri Tiomkin for Rio Bravo, High Noon, Red River, It's a Wonderful Life, and Dial M for Murder. So, Dad, I pose to you at this point. Harrison Ford, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Morgan Freeman, yes or no?
Yes.
Alfred Hitchcock.
Absolutely.
Edith Head.
If you're my age and big on movies, Edith Head and costumes were synonymous. Yes.
Okay. And Dmitri Tiomkin.
Yes, because of all the iconic movies he's done and for his guest starring appearance on the Jack Benny TV show where he was absolutely hilarious.
So there you go. So we now have, let's see here, 7 different honorees in our Hall of Fame. That would be Steven Spielberg, Alfred Hitchcock, James Stewart, Harrison Ford, Morgan Freeman, John Williams, Dmitri Tiomkin, and Edith Head. A little bit of an eclectic list so far, but you are welcome to try and find producers, directors, others, and obviously as we do more movies, there will be more eligible people. I know of at least 3 modern actors that are also eligible for this list. And I'll give you a hint, they all appear in the same franchise together.
So question though, okay, about the Hall of Fame, because this is going to come up eventually, is that someone like a Morgan Freeman, I think unquestionably probably deserves to be in there, but his movies are what? It was 3 Batman movies, and then it was
The Shawshank Redemption and Glory.
And Glory.
So 3 of those movies, he's just like a side guy. Not really what you think about Morgan Ford. Is their prominence and their status as an icon mean anything inside of the movie? So like Harrison Ford popping up in Apocalypse Now is such a cameo. Like he is in it, but you don't think about Harrison Ford with that movie.
Okay, but we are bending this a little bit because in order to get to 5 appearances on this program, I mean, we were already talking about the fact that I couldn't think of any actress that's appeared in 5 different movies credited on this show. I think,
That's the problem with Hollywood more than.
Well, even with directors that like to work with the same actresses over and over, such as Hitchcock did, we just haven't reviewed like all of the Grace Kelly movies to be even have her eligible. We've covered 3, excuse me. She's technically 3 because we've done Dial M, we've done Rear Window, and we've done High Noon. But beyond that, you just can't get to that 5th movie. And they will eventually come open as we come up. But it's also surprising to me, as many Spielberg and Hitchcock movies as we've covered, we have not gotten to enough films for David Fincher, for Martin Scorsese, despite their large filmographies. We haven't gotten there with Christopher Nolan, partly because I've been slow playing a lot of the Nolan films. We have some fairly big names that have not yet come up enough times to be eligible for this. The other part of the rules here, he also could be a credited producer, and that counts towards your 5-time total. You can be entered as an actor, but have produced 3 movies that are on the show if you've never been in them. Clint might also be eligible as well. Now that I'm thinking about it, Gran Torino, Unforgiven, we've covered 2 different Man with No Name movies, and we might have covered another directorial. No, we haven't covered that one yet.
So let's say Clint has 3 producing credits and an acting credit, or 2 acting credits. That's still 5.
Yes.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be like 5.
You just have to have work
Yep.
where you are credited in a film that we have discussed 5 different times, or 5 different films on the course of the show. I will repeat that just to make sure it's clear.
Yeah.
5 different films, so not even revisits. So it's not like if we've covered Jaws going to be 3 times this summer, you don't get to count
Jaws 3 times.
Robert Shaw 3 times.
Yeah.
And then count him once for The Sting. That doesn't work. So like Humphrey Bogart's not eligible yet either, even though we've covered Casablanca 3 times. But
yeah,
if you have had 5 different films covered during the course of the show with some type of credited role, you could have been the musical guest star. You could have done an original song and then showed up in a movie 3 times later.
I was about to say, Clint's had to have pooped out a score for somebody, right?
I thought he did the score for something. Was it Gran Torino?
Well, he did it for Gran Torino, $1 Million Baby, but I mean, he's got to have done it for somebody else, right?
I'm sure now in a Home Depot somewhere, Kieran is scribbling down on his notepad exactly what the rules are so he can get Clint eligible.
My Gran Torino.
But Billy Wilder's also 1 away from being eligible.
Okay.
But he'll be eligible by the end of the year. So we have some people that are very close.
Is Meryl close?
I don't know if we've discussed a Meryl Streep film yet.
Really?
I don't think we've discussed any one.
Not a single one. Y'all haven't done The Deer Hunter, right?
Oh, Jack Lemmon has 3.
Jack Lemmon has 2 that I can think of.
The Apartment.
Oh, excuse me. He does have 3. Some Like It Hot. We haven't done The Apartment yet.
Oh.
You and Mom keep thinking we did because we watched it for New Year's. So are we set? We don't have any further questions. The one other question I would like to say is that the maximum we will induct per month is going to be 5. I don't think we're going to get that many suggestions that we're going to max out in a particular month, but you never know.
If you cover a franchise like Oceans, though, something like that, where it could knock out like 3 people at once, you know.
Well, Don Cheadle, I think, has got 3 just based on those movies. Elliot Gould now has 4 because he's got MASH in those 3 movies. He'll have Nashville later this year, so he would be eligible.
Love Elliot Gould.
But you got to think some of those franchises where we've discussed a lot of people's work in a short period of time like that. When we had those theme months, and for Dad, we did Hitchcock month one year.
What? Casey Affleck, is he eligible? He's got the 3 Oceans, Good Will Hunting. Have you done Manchester yet?
No.
Let's see. No. That's an uplifting film.
Yeah.
Good
I don't know
times.
what his fifth film would be, though.
Assassination of Jesse James. I mean, that's
Nope.
one. Oh, that's a good question with Casey.
But he'd be close.
He's at 4.
I mean, Gary Oldman is going to be pretty close. He's already got
Yeah.
3 for the Batman films.
See, that's you do 3 of the franchise, and then so that Christian Bale's got to be really close then, if he's
Yeah.
not already there.
And we're going to have American Psycho coming up here pretty quickly, too. So
that's 4. Do you have a 5th?
depends on the fan vote, because I think the Prestige is going to be on next year's schedule if it gets voted in. But I don't think that's happened yet. And I don't know if we've had any others that have really come up yet. But anyway, now that we've exhausted the patience of everyone, let's get back to the movie. We left off at best performance. Dad, who did you have down?
Fellini. The concept of the film, the way it was shot, how it was done, revolutionary. He did by far the most work.
I think we default to directors a little too much sometimes, but it's hard not to do that here. However, I have him as my secondary because I went with the cinematographer, Otello Martelli, as my number 1, because I think the most remarkable thing about the entire film was the cinematography. I just love the way that the film looks. I love the way it's framed. I love how the backdrop of everything that's gorgeous from Italy is just so picturesque with aiding what is actually going on film. I don't know. For me, that was the number 1 thing that stood out. So I had to give him some credit here.
Yeah, hard to argue with that. But I am going with Fellini as well. It's just a beautiful piece of direction. I'm not really envious of you guys starting Fellini here. I started Fellini with La Dolce Vita years ago, over 20 years ago. But it didn't feel the same. Like seeing this movie now, I would have wanted to start with something like Nights of Cabiria or even 8.5 before I started with this, probably, because this is a challenging piece of work. But I think Fellini just does a beautiful job with the direction here. And I think it was Dana, or maybe it was you, Tom, that said he doesn't hold your hand. He's not going to give you the simple answers. He's going to make you do some work, which I think rewards upon repeat viewings. I think Fellini is my best performance here.
Best secondary performance, I already said I have Fellini, probably for the same reasons that you both have. I don't think I have anything particularly novel to say about what he did in this film, but for either of you.
Yeah, for me, it's Nina Rota. I love the music in this movie. I think it just is perfect encapsulation of what this movie is. It really is a great piece of instrumentation and really guides this movie beautifully. So I love this score.
I will say, isn't there like one song in here that is like the jazzy piece, the one that the lady's like stripping to towards the end of the film, that is also a song that's used in Playtime? Jacques Tati's Playtime?
I'm pretty sure it's Playtime. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I wanted to say, I remembered it from somewhere and it sounded familiar, and I want to say it's from Tati's Playtime.
Yeah. And I mean, I just love also the music supervision too, because I love the use of Perez Prado's orchestra in that outdoor cafe scene where he's trying to work and he starts kind of flirting with the young girl. I love the use of that, and kind of the use of non-diegetic music and diegetic music in this movie is, I think, really interesting. So music supervision is close, but I think the score by Nina Rota is, yeah, for me.
Marcello Mastroianni. He's got that look that he can look bewildered and at the same time look suave and swarmy.
Smarmy.
Smarmy.
Smarmy. You've had troubles with this particular word every time you've tried to use it.
Okay. Swarmy.
It's smarmy.
That's what I said. Swarmy.
Okay, Swarley. Anyway,
Swarmy.
I have him as my most charismatic because I think he's mesmerizing in the role. I really would have a hard time picturing anybody else doing it, even though I made a case that Paul Newman I could see doing a similar type of job. It's just a different movie. the way that he's able to kind of gravitate between this desperation and almost like groveling at certain points way that like he wants things from other people, but then he rejects them from other people. Take, for example, the dichotomy that he has between like trying to get Sylvia to go to bed with him or Magdalena to accept his marriage proposal after she technically proposes to him versus how he's treating Emma. There's a certain way he's like batting back and forth between the people that he wants to be in their circle or in their orbit versus the people that are actually willing to love him and are in his orbit, and how he's able to bat that back and forward feels real to me, even if it's done with a lot of hand motions.
Yeah, and I think, he's not my secondary or charismatic, but I do love his performance. I think it's very, very good. And he does a wonderful job, especially I think that final segment where he's the most intoxicated we see him, and he's getting like violent and aggressive with everyone. He's slapping the girl around. He's,
Riding her like a horse.
riding, and then he's putting the feathers on her, and it is going to some really despicable places in that last sequence that make you see just kind of how broken he is. And I think he performs that beautifully because there's just such self-loathing and self-hatred in him.
Most charismatic for me is Anita Ekberg. She can't act, but boy, does she fill a screen.
For me, the most charismatic is Otelli Martelli, who's the cinematographer. I think films just Rome beautifully and the outskirts of Rome. I mean, uses really interesting use of negative space in this movie. Like, the frame is never filled up. There's a ton of negative space, which I think also conveys the emptiness of Marcello, because he's always in these rooms by himself or these vast spaces by himself, and he always just is dwarfed in them. His cinematography is absolutely beautiful in this.
Let's move to best scene then. I have 5 nominees here. I have Night with Sylvia. I have Fake Miracle. I have Mr. Rubini's Visit. I have Madalena's Proposal. And I have Steiner's Demise. I obviously, for a 3-hour movie, have either combined several different scenes to like full sequences that are probably 10 to 20 minutes of the film, or just completely skip pieces of the film. I tried to highlight what I thought were the 5 best moments from the film, but what did I miss?
I mean, I think the final kind of orgy party, it should be in the conversation. It's an unpleasant scene. It's not mine, but I think that should merit at least some attention, personally.
Okay.
Christ flying by helicopter.
It's a really stunning opening. It's just striking and very famous opening now. Yeah, it's a great opening.
So we have Christ by Helicopter, Night with Sylvia, Fake Miracle, Mr. Rubini's Visit, Madalena's Proposal, Steiner's Demise, and Beach House Party. Out of these, what do you think is the best scene?
Personally, I lean towards it being Mr. Rubini's Visit. I think it's kind of the true Pandora's box of this movie. If you can get into it and understand his father and that relationship, you can sort of begin to understand Marcello a little bit. When he gets sick at the end, I've always taken it as he is older and basically can't perform, can't get an erection anymore. And he's filled with such shame, and it's like, I have to leave immediately. He's with this young woman. He should be feeling virile, but he certainly doesn't. And I think that shame is worn on him. But I also read that people also think it could be a heart attack. But I've always read it as he basically can't get it up.
I don't know. I took it more at face value. I can see where you're going with that there's something more
I think personal.
The surface.
To me, it's more personal.
Well, he makes that speech earlier in the film or in his sequence where he talks about how he's kind of a house cat at home, that he's just domesticated, he's silent, he's kind of neutered in a way. But when he's out and about and he can move and he can be fast and he can be youthful and whatever else. And so we see the youthful portion of him, but when he goes home, it's not even his home, but he just kind of shudders up. And to me, I looked at it more in the way that, and certain people know this very well about me. When I get to a certain level of drunkenness, I get very reflective.
Maudlin.
Sure, that's one word for it. You kind of revisit moments in your life, and I don't know if it's a depressive drunk. I can be a depressive drunk. I looked at it somewhat similarly there.
Yeah, it's that nostalgic drunk that relives their life, and my wife's that way. Not always, but she can get that way where she just wants to talk about every vacation we've ever been on and all the things we've done, and the kids, all that kind of stuff. So I get that absolutely.
For my best scene, I had Madalena's proposal. I think it's the most complex moment in the film because, and until I'd gone on a search, I went on an internet hunt to figure out exactly what happens at the end of this. But for her to kind of go into this other room and then propose to him as a disembodied voice that he hears and he's willing to accept. It's the one time we let him see a certain level of vulnerability, allowing himself to be attached to another, that he's willing to take her proposal. And then for her not to have really meant it and start apparently hooking up with somebody else from the party to the point where he just doesn't know what happens to her. He tries to go look for her and he can't find her. He ends up hooking up with somebody else. I don't know. I thought it was the most unguarded he was during the course of the film. And it's kind of emotionally devastating for me as an audience member watching that sequence play out.
Do you think he is more vulnerable than he is with his father when his father's kind of having that breakdown and he's asking his dad to please stay? And his dad's like, no, I have to leave.
I think so, yeah.
You think so? Yeah, you might be right.
There's two different ways to appeal to it. Are you potentially more heartbroken when your parents are in distress or when you have, I guess, the idea of what you want your life to be pulled out from under you?
Yeah,
Those are two different types of hurt. So I don't know how to categorize them, but they could be found in either way. Because my father's still here and I don't know that pain yet, or he's not really having as many issues, I guess. I assume, Dad, that you can still get it up. Then
I really want to know.
It was not an invitation to confess here. Anyway, then I look at it as the first as opposed to the second.
My other question about that one sequence would be kind of two of them juxtaposed with each other, is that he's like begging his father to stay to spend time with him because he's alluded to earlier in the scene, I don't know you. I want to, well, he tells his friend, I don't know him. I want to know him. And it's like this chance where he feels a little bit like this is it feels like the last chance he's ever going to have to get to know him in some way.
Mm.
And then as well in the proposal sequence, I do think the cinematography by Otello Martelli is really clues into that negative space and putting Marcello in a situation where he is filling up this frame and he's just a tiny little portion of it. And when you juxtapose that with Magdalena and her portion, she is filling up the frame. She is like all of the frame, and then he is such a tiny little piece of it.
What did you have, Dad?
I had Steiner's demise. It's the fragility of this whole life, which is it's not real. And this clearly marks that it can just collapse because it has no real value. His intellect, his friends, all of that ultimately meant nothing to him and left him empty. And he saw no future, no life, no joy. And so he ends it all. It's just,
Well, not just for himself, but for his children.
So
Yeah.
that's the most troubling part to me is that yes, he commits suicide, which is on its face difficult to deal with, but he chooses to take his children with him, which shows just how disillusioned and broken you are. I think.
Yeah.
It was definitely the most shocking part of the film for me.
And, it's something that I remembered there was a tragedy with Steiner, but I thought it was just him. I didn't remember it being the children.
Mm.
But as I was watching it and he was like putting his kids to bed, I started to remember, and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot he does kill them. And it kind of slowly creeped up on me this time, and it's just, I think, a brutal moment.
Favorite scene, I have the fake miracle. I think it's probably the funniest sequence of just watching everybody kind of fawn over these children supposedly seeing the Madonna, and everybody knows it's bullshit, but they do it anyway. To me, that's probably the most sacrilegious portion of the film, but it's still funny.
For me, I think favorite, it's tough in this movie because I think there are a lot of really expertly done sequences. In calling one a favorite is difficult because I think this is a movie that is almost easier to approach intellectually than it is kind of emotionally. And I think the sequence at the end at the beach house is kind of the crux of what Fellini wants to leave you with this character. Because I think this is the one time he begins to, in some way, hold your hand a little bit and be like, if you think this guy's like charming or affable, think again. He's despicable. He's a real piece of shit. So calling it a favorite seems hard for me, but I think it's the favorite in the sense that it does kind of unlock some things for me, if that makes sense.
For me, it's Mr. Rubini's visit. And what the scene means to me is very simply, it's not about that Marcello's trying to learn about his dad. He knows his dad. He just doesn't realize it. His dad has disappointed him his whole life. And this is one more disappointment. That's the part of this that he needs to come to terms with. His dad is who he is. And so he does know his dad. And unfortunately, that's the relationship that has resulted. And to me, it kind of, how to put this delicately, it took me a long time. I always wanted a better relationship with my dad. My dad had his own struggles and his own tragedy throughout his life. And it was when I came to terms with that, even though it wasn't the idyllic relationship I wanted, that he gave me what he could as a father. And once I learned to accept that, I ultimately learned to accept him and to understand the relationship and appreciate what relationship we did have more. And I see that in this scene. And I think the question is whether Marcello understands it.
Most indelible moment, it's the flying Jesus.
Yeah, it's between that and the Trevi Fountain for me. I think both are just two incredibly iconic moments of cinema. The other third, which is Marcello just sitting in that chair during the proposal scene, kind of by himself alone. Those are the three kind of indelible images for me. So I'll say those are the moments as well. But I think I'm going to narrow down to with you the Jesus being flown over Rome.
I have the Trevi Fountain.
For Anita Ekberg.
Yeah.
All right, so that looks like a good spot for our second break. We will be right back. Did you know? All of our newest episodes are also now in video format. That's right, you can see my resting nerd face and all of Dana's famous okays in pristine high definition. And that's not all. We're also on the cusp of a few different live streams coming up in the near future. First, our annual Oscars preview will be live streamed on our YouTube channel the week before the Oscars, and then we will have a live post-Oscars review the night after the awards with a whole bunch of your favorite guests dropping by to share their thoughts on what happened. We've also got a James Bond rankings live stream series planned and much, much more. If you want to check that all out, just head to youtube.com/GMOAT podcast, where I have the full video and audio feeds on our website, ronnieduncanstudios.com/GMOAT podcast. Both of those are also available in the episode description of this episode, so check us out there. And if you do, please like the video or subscribe to us. We would really appreciate it. Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Yes, we have one. Barry Michael Cooper, 66, American screenwriter. New Jack City, Sugar Hill, Above the Rim.
Unfortunately, that is a set of movies that I have yet to experience, so I don't have a whole lot to add here. But we remember him fondly for his contributions with a moment of silence in his honor. Thank you. Let's move to best funniest lines. Steiner, don't be like me. Salvation doesn't lie within four walls. I'm too serious to be a dilettante and too much of a dabbler to be a professional. Even the most miserable life is better than the sheltered existence in an organized society where everything is calculated and perfected.
Steiner, the day you understand that you love Marcello more than he does, you'll be happy.
Paparazzo, what do you think you like most in life? Sylvia, I like lots of things, but there are three things I like most. Love, love, and love.
Can you say that without being sarcastic? Steiner, we must get beyond passions, like a great work of art. In such miraculous harmony, we should love each other outside of time, detached.
Poetress at Steiner's party. The three great escapes: smoking, drinking, bed.
Marcello, I'm wasting time. I won't manage anything anymore. Once I had ambitions, but maybe I'm losing everything. I forgot everything.
Laura, stay free, available, like me. Never get married, never choose, even in love. It's better to be chosen.
I'm out.
I have one more. Poetess at Steiner's party. We must all think about tomorrow, but without forgetting to live today. All right, let's move to the Stanley rubric. Legacy is up first. This is a measure of the legacy of the film approximately 5 years after it came out. So roughly 1965 to today, what is the legacy of the film? We split this category between 5 points for the industry and 5 points for the audience for a total of 10. Dad, I usually give you the option to go first or second. What would you like to do?
I will go first. This is highly acclaimed. It has been honored or copied in various films. It's loved by the industry. For me, the industry for legacy is a perfect 5. For the public, however, I mean, it's a 64-year-old film, 65-year-old film. I don't think a lot of people are familiar with it, especially in the United States, unless you happen to be a real big film person or have studied film, a cinephile. I give it a 2.5. I think it's more popular in Europe probably than it is here, but I can't really judge that. But I think 7.5 overall.
I will match your 5 on the industry. It's going to be really hard after that very long list that I read before to say that it's not respected immensely by the industry. But I had a hard time with the audience, and I think you're going to come in and higher than I was. My approximation is whether or not this has been viewed by about half of the cinephile community. I think it is a respected film to the point where I think a lot of cinephiles have seen it, but whether or not probably half the community has seen it versus maybe a slightly lower percentage has me somewhere hovering between a 2 and a 1.5, because the cinephiles are not the general audience. If you're going to say that this is 5 for me is like everybody's seen it, has name recognition of it, it's seeped into the culture. The Matrix would be a great example of that. The Wizard of Oz. Certain films that have that cachet with a general audience that even if you're not a big cinephile, you know what those films are. This is not that. And so the lower we get down in these rungs, it's where only film fans would see it. I don't think anybody from the general public is seeking this film out. And the only reason to do that is either, one, you're a cinemasochist that likes to discuss it on podcasts like this, or you're a film fan who's like a completionist, like certain people that we know, who have to finish like all the great films of all time, and they like to tick things off of lists, which is great. I just don't know where I'm at for how many people out of even the cinephile community have seen this movie. if we were talking maybe like 8.5, I think that percentage is higher, and I would probably give it a little bit more of the leniency of the doubt. But I'm going to go with a 1.5. I have a 6.5.
So yeah, I'm going to piggyback and say industry wide, this is an easy 5. Maybe one of the biggest slam dunks you could have industry wide. Audience wise, it's a little trickier. I'm just going to fill you in to my sibling text exchange that I had earlier because I mentioned, going on discuss a movie. They asked what it was. I said La Dolce Vita, and my brother says, "That's a real snoozer, Pete. What are you going to talk about?" My brother likes to poke and prod, so I thought he was kidding a little bit, but he says, "Yeah, it was very boring. I watched it in TCF 112, which is the same class I took a few years later. But I think I remember watching 8.5. So the audience on this is certainly cinephiles, but also it is still shown in film classes, like entry-level film classes today. It's still a significant film that is shown over and over again. So if you're a kid who's going for telecommunications and film, something like that, a lot of kids just take films. They're like, it'll be easy, right? They're potentially going to see this movie. And I think the name recognition is a little bit higher than you're giving credit, Tom. So I'm gonna go down for a 3 here, just because you take the cinephiles and you take the fact that this is going to be on a lot of entry level film courses, just as a way to, hey, this is Italian cinema. Federico Fellini, one of the kind of masters of foreign cinema. So I think that gives it that little leg up. I think to me, I'm gonna stay right at 8.
So that's a 7.33 average between the three of us. Let's move to impact and significance. This is a measure of the impact and significance in the initial 5 years after its release, so roughly 1960 to 1965. What was the impact both among the industry and the audience at large? Again, we divide this category 5 and 5 points for a total of 10. I suppose I can start here and kind of lead us off. For this one, I think that 4 Oscars for a foreign film in 1960 is actually quite a bit, given all the trouble that international films have had being recognized by the Academy in many different eras. For him to be nominated for Best Director, even though the film itself was not nominated for Best Picture, he was the only director to not have his film be nominated for Best Picture. He is a decorated Academy Award-winning director multiple times over. And so I do think that between that and the reviews, it had some industry support, enough to, for me, give it a 5. Again, it's a slightly weighted 5 based on the context here. But on the audience side, this is something where we've modified, or within context, modified this category a few different times. When we discussed Three Idiots, when we discussed Your Name, we gave those films some pretty high level impact just due to their popularity within the market that they were originally intended. And within Italy, this was only the second highest grossing film of the year behind, I think it was War and Peace. And then it was the top grossing foreign language film in North America in the same year. It's also one of the highest seen or recognized foreign language films within the 1960s. I think it basically cemented Fellini as a important director at that point in time for people, especially as foreign cinema became more and more popular during that time, as we were kind of getting out of the Code era. So for me, I have a 5 for the industry. I have a 4 for the audience. I have a 9.
So, Tom, I'm pretty lockstep with you in this. I think to me that initial 5 years industry wide, this is about as good as a film could do in the industry at the time, at least for a foreign film. You know, if we're talking something like West Side Story, that's probably a little bit different bar because it's an American film. The audience is a little bit different, but for a foreign film, this is about as high as the ceiling could get. So I think industry-wise, this is a 5. General public, I think as well, this is almost as good as you could do. I'm going to be a pinch higher than you and do it a 4.5. But this is, I mean, if you're a foreign film director, this is almost the equivalent of Bong Joon-ho just like stomping around the Oscars 6 years ago. So I think 9.5 for the initial 5-year release.
Okay, for me, the industry, I understand your point, both of you, with the 5. I just went a half a point down simply because I read several of the reviews. There were some that were not as excited about the film as possible. It still, even though it was a foreign film, didn't do as quite as well as possible. So I'm at a 4.5. And for the public, I gave a lot of credence to the fact that it was very popular in Europe. The fact is that it was the highest grossing foreign feature. And just on the edge of the 5 years, it had a theatrical release again in the United States and did well in that second theatrical release. So I went with a 4.5 for that. So I'm at a 9.
So that is a 9.17 average between the three of us. Let's move to Novelty then. This is a appreciation of the originality of anything related to the film. Usually it's mostly story material, but it can be other things as well. And the capitalization or the execution on that originality. We split this category 5 and 5 for a total of 10. And Peterson, would you like to start here?
Yeah, so I think pretty much a clean sweep. I'm doing 5 and 5 here, especially for the time. This was a revolutionary film in almost every single regard. And I think it does change cinema. There's a reason why film schools are still showing it. There's a reason why it still makes Sight and Soundless. It's both original in concept and idea, but also execution. So I am doing a clean 10 here.
I'm also at a 10. The originality of the little vignettes or vignettes or vignette, excuse me, the little vignettes.
Vignette.
Vignette. The concept of the vignette that's been adopted by so many different films and was beautifully shot, and the cinematography was great. The concepts were great. It's a 10.
Dana, can I ask you a question just with the vignette structure? Do you think if this film is made by a lesser filmmaker or a filmmaker today that it flashes on the third day, day 3, whatever happens on day 3? Like, do you think it titles it and kind of more spoon feeds and hand holds you in that way? I think him just dropping you into each scene is also part of the brilliance here.
Probably. I think that we would overthink it and think that the audience couldn't figure it out for themselves.
All right, let me play a little bit of the spoiler here. I have a 4.5 for the originality. I don't think that this is the most original thing that I've ever seen. I don't think that I could say that it separates itself completely from everything that's in its contemporary orbit at the time, but I'll go only the half step down. I do think it is somewhat original in its storytelling, in its depiction, its art direction, its costume design, several of the technical elements. And yes, those also contribute to the execution. But there are some things in this that, from an execution standpoint, that I just have some criticisms on. The lack of a narrative structure. I would have preferred had he probably put those title cards in to basically signify whether there was like gaps in time or whatever else. Maybe to some, they like to be extra challenged, as has been a key phrase on this program. But I don't know if I want to be that challenged. There's a difference between being challenged and being spoon-fed. And I think there's a wider gap than people give it credit for. So there are some pieces to that. I think that some of the acting by the lesser characters is a little frantic and a little hard to understand, particularly because you're trying to read the subtitles. Maybe that improves for me as things kind of go through, but I give it high marks because, again, it's a beautifully shot film. There's a lot of great technical mastery here. And the ending also leaves me a little bit cold. So I'm going to go with a 4.5 and a 4. I have an 8.5. So that is a 9.5 between the three of us. All right, let's go to classicness, the amorphous moving target category that apparently we can't seem to get right and seemingly changes every week, to the glee of one Mr. Andrew Corns. Dad, we usually let you start. I'll let you take a crack at this.
We've been doing 7. We've kind of adjusted it down to 6. The scene where Anita Ekberg is slapped gives points down. The orgy and the objectification of the women and how that's handled, points down. But equally, we have a lot of women who are conniving and manipulative of the men involved here as well, so that it kind of levels out that aspect of it. And really, it is an expose of wealth and fame and the shallowness of it that resonates. Then you could do it now, and it would probably be as poignant now as it was 65 years ago.
You mean Succession?
And so I think that gives a couple of points up from the 6, point back for physical abuse, and then back again the fact that it's neutral as far as the exploitation by both men and women in the film. So I'm at a 7.
I'll also mention a show that's going to be coming back in a couple of weeks as well that is in this kind of general ballpark, but The White Lotus.
Yep. Very excited.
And if you also want a more modern film of the rich eat the rich or that type of thing, or the poor eat the rich, Saltburn. It's out there. There are plenty of these.
It truly is out there. That's true. Just like Barry Keoghan's Wang is out there. It is there.
Spoilers for anybody who hasn't seen the film yet, but yeah. Okay. As far as I go on this, I will be consistent that I have a problem with a lot of these films and how they just seemingly have this attitude they can manhandle women without really any consequences. And it was a cultural thing. I get that. But if I'm going to give a lot of points down for The Quiet Man for basically doing it, and it's not just the one scene where she slaps him, it's multiple different scenes, because there's another one where he slaps Emma that's also troubling to me. There is just the way that they kind of like pull them around and kind of, it's a gendered patriarchal attitude throughout the course of the film that I think pervades it as well. That if it were updated, I think they would modify it ever so slightly in the cultural attitude, that you have to give it at least a few grains of salt off for that. That being said, obviously the fact that I've now named at least 2 TV shows and a movie that are kind of re-updating this concept repeatedly, this is still a concept that works and something that sells. So I don't think you can give it too many points down for that either. I think that fuck it. I'll just go with your 7. I was going to go with a 6, but I think you made a couple of other points that I'll just even it out.
So I understand the misogyny and I understand the physical abuse being a sticking point. I think where I differ on that is that we are supposed to see that. And I think Fellini wants to rub your nose in it. He wants you to feel just how gross it is. I don't think he's wanting you to come away thinking, I'm glad Marcello slaps Emma. I'm glad he slaps the girl at the end. I think you're supposed to see just how empty and vacant he is. So I'm a little more forgiving of that one component than you guys are. I don't think it's something that really pulls back for me. I can 100% understand why it does. But personally, I see that, and I think we're supposed to feel just how ugly it is.
I think it's a representative of a power dynamic that no longer exists. Like, even in movies where you'd represent a certain level of misogyny and patriarchal nature, you're still not going to see that level where a man can just, in the middle of the street, think he can slap a woman and have absolutely no consequences. It's a different time and era completely, and it is aged poorly in my mind. And that's, I guess, my only argument really against it.
Yeah, the early slap of Anita Ekberg, I feel that a little bit more strongly there. I
Sure.
don't necessarily feel it with the Emma and final sequence. I think those are where we're really supposed to see just how ugly this man is. But and as far as classic goes, this is, as I said, it's made every list imaginable. It's still shown in film classes. Cinephiles do find that this is one they have to watch. And where I think 8.5 is probably going to inch a little bit higher for me with Fellini, personally. This, I think, is going to be right at 8.5 classicness for me.
So that is a 7.5 average between the three of us. Let's go to rewatchability. Let's start with you, Peterson.
This might be the hardest category to pin down with rewatchability, because I think that it certainly is rewarding upon repeat viewing. I don't really know how often I really want to go back to this world. I think it leaves you hollow because you're watching kind of a hollow man. So it does leave you cold. But I think upon each viewing, it gets richer and richer for me. So it's an interesting rewatchability. It's the Schindler's List thing. Schindler's List is an incredible film. Do I want to pop on Schindler's List? Not really. But I do think it has the same thing that Schindler's List has a little bit, where Schindler's List is Spielberg. So he's got to make a little bit fun. Like the first hour when he's doing all the swindling and all that stuff, it's a little fun. And then it kind of rubs your face in just the horror, which is a little bit what this movie does. So it's a weird kind of rewatchability where I will return to this movie. I'm not gonna wait 20 years, certainly. I'll probably watch it in the next 3. And I think I'm gonna get a lot out of it. So for this kind of movie, I think it's very rewatchable. But I know you're a big James Bond guy. It's not a James Bond where I'm like, I'm just gonna pop this on for fun. So I think for this kind of movie, it's an 8. If that makes sense.
This is usually the most subjective category. I've taken to being a little bit more objective lately about this category so as to try and remove myself a little bit, but I mirror some of the same contextual concepts here. It's a longer movie, which I think is challenging for most people. Yes, they'll sit and watch 4 episodes of NCIS back to back, but 3-hour movie, but by the same token, it's a 3-hour movie. You have to kind of like plan this out if you're not going to break it up, as I usually have to do when it comes to movies of this length. I just can't maintain this level of concentration unless I'm specifically in a theater to be able to see it anymore. I don't know.
It's not an Avengers Endgame that you put on and you're like, oh, this is a rollicking kind of adventure.
Well, and that specifically has so many different stages where there's like certain levels of action. There are some stretches in this film where it gets a little bit, it dips and ebbs and flows, and you have to kind of wait out the patience of it in order to find where the best parts of it are. I don't think it's necessarily slow, but it's not quick, it's not action heavy, it's not hold your attention. So if you have any level of ADHD, film ADHD, then this is not something that you're going to return to. And the other problem that I have, and I've brought it up several times with subtitled films that we've done, I have to make a concerted effort to watch those because you have to read it. I can't background watch it and put it on and let things happen and I'm not paying full attention to it. I feel like my attention has to be much more closely held, especially the first time through on something, where I don't feel like I can miss anything. And especially in this movie where I already made the complaint that the Italians were talking so fast I couldn't keep up even on the subtitles. It's a little bit more difficult from that standpoint for me. So then you throw in the objectivity of, and maybe we're doing this a little bit too much to English speakers, but a black and white foreign language film that's got no narrative structure. Try and convince or sell anybody in a general population to watch that unless it's attached to Fellini. If this was Mario Fettuccini, this is not necessarily going to be something that anybody's going to watch. So by that token, I think I'm going to go with a 3.5.
My one question to that would be, because I understand the sentiment, but I'm going to compare probably the first time in history. I'm going to compare this movie to Armageddon, which is
Michael Bay and Federico Fellini in the same sentence. Okay.
But Armageddon to me is a movie that is made up of about 20 different movies inside of it. Because it's like, oh, if you didn't like the Russian space station 10 minutes, don't worry, we're rocketing around the asteroid now. So it's all these, like, it also a very vignette film. To me, this has a similar quality where it's like, I don't know, Luigi Prosecco, let's say he's watching this movie and he's like, well, I don't know if I really liked the little typing scene where he's out in the cafe. Well, that's only 10 minutes, so I'm on to the next one. So, like, you do have this constantly revolving story and structure that pulls you into a different narrative every few minutes. So I think, yeah, but just so there to me, that may be why it moves pretty well.
To the uninitiated, I think this is going to be really difficult and challenging in a way that they're not anticipating. And already they're going to have to make a plan to watch it. I just think it's going to be a hard sell.
My brother did say, he goes, I got a lot out of it, a 2-hour nap. And I said, well, so you watched at least 50 minutes of it.
Well, there's the Hill brothers for you, folks. Anyway, Dad, let's wrap this up.
Okay. Will I watch it again? Yes. But I got to plan for it because it's 3 hours and I have to give it my undivided attention. And the biggest part of it is that makes it difficult for me to watch. There's no way in hell my wife's sitting there and watching it with me.
Why does that make it harder for you to watch?
Well, because
she never sits down anyway.
Well, sometimes when we actually have a chance to watch a movie, she'll sit and watch a movie because she says she'll sit and watch a movie with me and then basically either complain that the movie isn't,
spoon-fed and an easy rom-com that looked great on the movie box.
Yeah, that, what's going on? I don't understand. So I'm going to give it a 5. That's about where I go, where I'll rewatch it. And if somebody else wants to watch it, or if we're talking about something, yeah, I'll sit and watch it again.
Okay, so that is a 5.5 average between the three of us for rewatchability. For audience score for this one, we had a 78% for Google users and a 90% for Rotten Tomato users, giving us an 8.4. So to repeat the categories, for Legacy, we had a 7.33. For Impact and Significance, we had a 9.17. For Novelty, we had a 9.5. Classicness, a 7.5. Rewatchability, a 5.5. And audience score, a 8.4, giving us a final total of 47.4, and currently placing it on our list between Duck Soup and 3 movies that are all tied together: A Night at the Opera, His Girl Friday, and Major League, for number 98 on our current list.
Wait, what was that 3 again? Duck Soup, His Girl Friday, and Major League?
That is correct.
Rest in peace, Bob Uecker, but that's a strange 5 to be together.
Well, to be fair, Man Who Shot Liberty Valance is also tied with Duck Soup above it.
Okay.
We are going to be doing a couple of tiebreakers next season, but I doubt it will be for either of those. We're still waiting on our 5 Timers Club to be able to vote on all of the tiebreakers. So, but I think it's been narrowed down probably to the 2 we're going to end up doing. But either way, at number 98 currently. So interesting. I would have probably guessed much lower, but it doesn't have to go very far or very many points to be able to drop probably a very far way down the list. As I think about every 10 spots is about 1 point, essentially.
Okay.
So if you're dropping about 5 points, you're dropping about 50 spots overall on the list, would be my guess. As always, if you have any issues with our scoring, have any comments for us, just want to give us some hassle or some grief, actually want to support us in whatever we do, I mean, we'll take that too. Kind of unusual. Most people are just crabby on like TikTok and shit. But you can write us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on any of our socials at GMOAT Podcast on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, or TikTok. Or you can find us at the website, ronnieduncanstudios.com/GMOAT Podcast. Let's move quickly to remaining questions for this one. First one, what happens with Marcello and Emma's relationship? I have to assume it ends, but we don't ever get any closure on what happens with them.
Oh, I don't think it ends. I think it's going to be a spiral like this for the rest of their lives. Personally. Yeah.
I suppose I do know couples like that.
Yeah. I mean, I just think it's going to be a cycle for the rest of their lives.
Rather be miserable than alone.
Well, Tom Wamskin's quote, I don't know if the sad I am going to be without you is better than the sad I am with you.
Next one. Does Marcello ever settle down from his wanderlust? My guess is no.
No.
I think that if it didn't happen with the death of Steiner, it's not going to happen. Or did he reach some kind of pinnacle of excess at the party and now he's going to be changed? I could see that reading, but I don't personally feel it. But I could see the reading.
All right. My last thing here, and this is one I didn't prep you guys for, but it's like one of the weird lines that stuck out to me during this movie. In a phone conversation that Marcello is having with Emma, she says, "Come home. We'll eat something light. I'll make you ravioli." Of all the pastas out there, ravioli is not the one I'm going to if I want a light meal. What the fuck?
Well, it depends on the ravioli. I mean, if you're have
cheese,
it with
butter, and
yeah, I mean, if it's squash filled, it can be light.
Yeah, I've done some ravioli at home that's like goat cheese and do a little squash inside and a little balsamic and just some pine nuts or something, nice and light and easy.
Yeah.
I don't know. Even then, I feel it's always very heavy.
A little bit of sage.
You have like, unless you're going to have like 4 pieces, which let's be honest with ravioli, who's having just 4 pieces? It's just never felt light to me, but all right, to each their own. Any remaining questions for either of you gentlemen?
Nope.
With this film, being that it is kind of that canonical film school Watson I was talking about earlier, I was wondering, how do you feel like those canonical film school things that people watch, or even like entry-level films, how do you feel that plays into cultural relevance for movies?
Are you asking for how we would score that?
No, just kind of like, I was curious because to me, this is being a cinephile, and my connection to the movies more as a cinephile, whereas a lot of people, I'd say, probably 50% of the people, if not more, just hanging out in the world today, if they've seen this movie, it's probably in some kind of film theory class or entry to film. And I was curious kind of with cultural relevance, because there's certainly movies like that exist now as kind of objects of study more than objects of like passion and objects of kind of truly wanting to seek out and watch, which this is a little bit of that outside of the film community.
It kind of reminds me of Twain with books, which is a classic is what no one reads but everyone wants on their shelf. This is that kind of thing where you're like an insider in the cool club because you've seen Fellini and such. Most of the time, it's a pseudo-intellectual aspect. It's a Steinerism, to use Fellini's own thing, where I don't think they really appreciate it or understand it, but they've taken the class, and so they pretend to understand and think about it or the impact of it more than what they really probably do.
I'll be honest, part of the point of this show is a little bit of a rebellion against the films that we perceived, especially those that are often taught in film school, as being the greatest movies, because most of them are just unenjoyable dreck. They're fine conversation pieces, but to actually sit and watch and enjoy them is just difficult. Like my relationship with Citizen Kane. I've come to appreciate it more, but that doesn't mean that I, for fun, will ever put it on. It's going to be more of an exercise that it's like going back to school a little bit every time I watch it, as opposed to like Casablanca, which I just vehemently enjoy more and more comparatively. So any of these ones that are taught in film school come with a grain of salt for me automatically when you say that phrase associated with it, that it has a certain level of pretentiousness attached to it. And my almost first reaction is going to be messaging one Andrew Corns to figure out what he thinks of it, so I know whether or not I need to really invest my time in it.
Yeah, I understand that.
He understands certain levels of pretentiousness in film and can remove himself enough and be a little bit down to earth and comment about his film watching, but he at least knows that world a lot better than I do, because I look at a lot of that stuff, that intellectualism about film, and I'm just like, guys, you don't need to find the unearthed themes from Jurassic Park. Just watch for the dinosaurs.
I know, and it's kind of like in English classes in college where every English professor is trying to find the Christ figures in every aspect of the book. I've often said that if I were to grade or I was going to rank or do my own movie reviews, I would do a two-part. One is a scale of 1 to 5. Is it enjoyable? Is it fun? The other would be 1 to 5, the artistic aspect of the film. Because there are films that I know are just schlock, but I find them fun. I find them entertaining. I don't mind going and seeing them because I'm going to enjoy watching them. There are some films that are designed to make me think, and there should be two different aspects of those. It doesn't mean that the fun films automatically should be discounted as being trash and not worth your time. But by the same token, you shouldn't automatically hold certain films to such high regard that they're this rarefied air, but not something you would enjoy sitting and watching.
I know they're terrible movies, but I will sit and watch Dude, Where's My Car and Old School and Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle a lot more than I will Citizen Kane or La Strada or certain Kurosawa films, even as much as I like some of those. It's just, those are going to be turn off my brain, let images come and entertain me, and that's as far as it needs to go. Those movies have their time and place. I just find myself gravitating more towards those than I probably ever will with certain other intellectual films. That's not to mean that I don't have an appreciation for them or can enjoy them occasionally, but it's also not what I'm going to be doing when I'm trying to fall asleep.
Yeah, well, and I get that because I get the comedy thing. I probably lean in that case more towards like dumb action movies. So
Sure.
2 weeks ago, I watched Den of Thieves for the second time because I'm like, the first time I was like, this is really fun. Second time, I'm like, this movie rules. It's heat for dummies, but it's tons of fun.
Yeah, garbage crime.
Yeah, a little trash piece.
All right. I want to thank our guest for being on with us again. It doesn't look like you will be back with us again until late August for, is it Pater Panchali?
Peter Panchali, yeah.
Peter.
Okay. Satyajit Rai film.
Yes. Another first time watch for me that's highly pretentious, and a film school watch would be my guess.
I don't think this one's that pretentious. I mean, not that La Dolce Vita is not a little bit pretentious, but it's probably similar to this. Peter Panchali is just, it's like a coming of age story. It's a trilogy. He made 3 of them.
Regardless, you won't be back with us for almost the same amount of time, in where you've logged already 7 episodes on the show since early October of last year, 2024. So it's
Damn.
going to be a long dry spell for you on the show.
I'll hit my spring training.
But if we needed to remind anybody, where are you and what are you doing?
Yeah, so you can catch me at War Starts at Midnight. You can also check out all of my handles are Peterson W. Hill, Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, and Letterboxd. And, probably I need the time off, too, to get ready for the Revisionist Almanac, because that record is in May, and I've got about 50 movies to watch. So, yeah.
If you have not heard my PSA at the end of last season, I would suggest that you go listen to that right now and probably cut about 20 of those off of that list, because you do not need to watch that many films.
Yes, I think you're saying first time I watched like 45, this time I watched like 15, right?
Yeah, it was pretty much closer to that. I realized I no longer needed to compete directly with Andrew. I just simply needed to watch the few that actually were going to matter. And you can really carve it down that way.
Yeah, because I don't need to watch the 50th movie to maybe find a performance that might make the 5,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So otherwise, any final thoughts for the week, Dad?
No, I don't. I'm looking forward to the Oscars. I've seen quite a few of the films, but I also have not seen quite a few of the films. So I'll be ramping up my viewership of some of the Best Picture nominees here shortly. And considering where I am, the fact that The Brutalist is probably not going to be anywhere close except Madison seems likely. But
Madison's about 30, 40 minutes, you said?
It's closer to 90 minutes.
90, okay.
On that same note, I did see The Brutalist over the weekend, and I will say I enjoyed it. I don't think it's going to be for everybody. I think it is a highly metaphorical film. I will say that much. The ending also leaves me a little bit wanting, and I think it has a very ambiguous ending. Let's say that. So there's a lot to potentially draw from that. But without getting very spoilery, I did enjoy it. And I also think a 15-minute intermission, timed intermission in the middle of your film, if you're going to be 3+ hours, please, for God's sakes, everybody do this. It's glorious. You can talk to your neighbor. You can go use the bathroom. You can refill your soda or your popcorn. Wonderful. If you're going to make us sit through this shit and actually want us to come to the theater instead of watching this shit at home, do the one thing where we can get up and actually use the bathroom like we can at home.
Tom, my one question is with The Brutalist. I've heard there is kind of a delineation point when that intermission happens and people are like, the first half is undisputed masterpiece. Second half, people, if they're down on the movie, that's the part they're down on.
I have talked to people who felt that way. I actually thought the second half was stronger. I may be one of the lone people, but I in a way that certain people around me have said that it's a little bit heavy-handed and a little bit too cute by half. I didn't necessarily take it that way, but took it more as something that I thought was made a little bit more for me. And I do think that there is a wow moment that I had that maybe doesn't show up for everybody else, and that kind of interprets your viewing of the second half. But given that one of the best performances of the entire movie doesn't even show up until the second half, I would also strongly suggest that the second half is at least as good as the first.
Wait, who's that? Felicity Jones?
Felicity Jones.
Oh, she's not in the first half. Okay.
She's not in the first half at all.
Oh, I didn't know that. And Brody, is he going to get some more hardware on his shelf?
He probably should.
Yeah.
Although, and as much as we talked about A Real Pain a few weeks ago, as much as I enjoyed Kieran Culkin and I'm for putting him in the supporting category, this is Guy Pearce's award. It should be. I'm sorry. What he does in that movie is it's almost It's not quite. It's not Ray Fiennes in Schindler's. It's not J.K. Simmons in Whiplash, but it's pretty damn close. Like, it's, for me, it would be almost on the same level as Bardem's win for No Country for Old Men. I think it's close to that level, at least for me. I don't know if everybody sees that way, but this is maybe the best I've ever seen Guy Pearce, personally.
An actor I really like.
Well, then you'll enjoy this performance from him.
Yeah.
So, with that looks like a good spot for the end of this week. Thank you for listening. Let's face it, I've fucked them all. I mean, that's what I do. That's why I went to beauty school. Next week, we welcome back returning guest Sarah Shea of the Shea Cinema Podcast to discuss Shampoo from 1975. Directed by Hal Ashby, written by Robert Towne and Warren Beatty, music by Paul Simon, starring Warren Beatty, Julie Christie, Goldie Hawn, Lee Grant, and Jack Warden. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in on our fun. You can also email the show at RonnieDuncanStudios.com /GMOAT podcast or at greatestalltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com, or find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GMOAT podcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronnie Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our technical provider and distributor is Captivate FM.